All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are so excited to see folks today. I'm really excited to have with us Camille Lovano, our Director of Advocacy, and Noel Rivera, our Advocacy and Education Analyst. And so, I've been at the food bank for just a little over a year, and I'm pointing that out because we have two of our longer tenured folks with us here today. So you've got a really deep well of knowledge here. Camille's been with us for 10 years and Noel for 15 years. They've worked in a lot of different areas of the food bank with, everyone. So obviously, as you know, our conversation is going to be focused on the White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health, but you've got some real experts here. So we are really excited to get started. Please use the Q&A for questions. We'll save some time at the end to dive into those. And of course, for some reason you think of something afterwards, or we run out of time, we will get in touch with you. We'll get your emails and make sure that we get all your questions answered for you. All right, so let's get this kicked off. Hope everyone is doing well today. But we are here because of like I said, the White House conference that just happened. And I was hoping maybe we could just, set the stage. The folks who are joining us today are really familiar with our work and our community, but just, why this conference is happening now, what's going on in our community that makes this so important to be having in 2022.
Sure. I can kick this off just to talk a little bit about what we're seeing leading into the conference, especially over the past couple of years, or past 3 years almost now with the pandemic. We've had a rough few years, but we've also had time to innovate, to learn what works, and to pilot a lot of new programming, both as it relates to food and emergency assistance programs, but also just seeing what types of programs work to address hunger. I will say for food banks, it's been a rough year. The reason for that being the supply chain. It's something that's affected all of us in our daily lives, and that is no different for the food bank. We have seen a major drop in federal commodity programs like TFAP. TFAP is the Emergency Food Assistance Program. It's a mouthful, so we just call it TFAP at food banks. And the point of TFAP is to provide American-grown produce, protein items, dairy, and just all of the essentials that a family uses in preparing meals at home. The goal is to provide all of those foods to food banks across the country. And during the pandemic, TFAP received an influx of funding because Congress and USDA understood that we were under a lot of stress. Lines were incredibly long. People were struggling to make ends meet. And so we received extra funding, but all of that funding has dried up. So what has happened over the past year is that we're down about 40% in the amount of TFAP food that we're distributing to our network. 40% to our network of partners. And that means that our community is receiving less food. And that's at a time when we know the demand is up. So what has happened over the past year, food banks, advocates from across the country have been really asking Congress and USDA to help to provide additional food and funding so that we can continue meeting the need in our communities. And USDA responded. We were incredibly excited just a couple of weeks ago to receive news that USDA is providing $1.5 billion in funding for TFAP, as well as what's known as the Local Food Purchase Program. Ohio is going to be receiving about $50 million of that funding. So all 12 food banks across the state will use that money to source this really nutritious TFAP food. Like I mentioned before, it's your proteins, it's your dairy items, it's the staples like oats. I say that and then I completely blank. Oats, applesauce, a lot of fresh veggies, proteins like chicken, pork, beans, legumes, etc. So we'll be able to get a lot more food out coming next calendar year, which is really great news.
Of course,
But
it's
that was
still 3 months away.
it is still, and it's after the holidays, which is going to be really challenging. So that is that is the news that we learned about a week before the White House Conference on Hunger. And you can imagine food banks and advocates were really excited to have that news after what's been a pretty rough year of trying to just keep up with what we're seeing at our network of partners.
Yeah, well, and our struggle at the food bank with having to, purchase more food, it's also more expensive. And I know, then that's the inflation that everyone else is seeing. And I know our clients are seeing that inflation. You had mentioned about, the need that we're seeing. And I know when we were talking with Kristen Micklebank last month, our demand has been some of the highest over this summer than it's been even during some of the worst times of the pandemic. And I just saw inflation for food went up another almost a full percentage again this month. So I know we're seeing a lot of struggles with us being able to provide services and also for the folks who need our services. So it's really hard out there. But what this comes to mind is, it sounds great to have this emergency assistance with the 1.5 billion you just mentioned, but what I was hoping from the conference is to not have to rely on emergency appropriations and using emergency programs. So I'm hoping that might be part of what the conference was getting at. So before we jump into what happened this year, I know this is the first time we had a conference in over 50 years. And I just hoping you maybe could share a little bit about, kind of the first conference and then how this conference, kind of the genesis of that, just to give people a little context about how powerful this conference can be. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add a little background here. So first one was 1969 under President Nixon. If you if you, for the record, I wasn't around for that one, but if you can flash back to what the country was like back then, whole different landscape than we have now. So, I think back then hunger was not very much understood, definitely not to the extent it is now. I'm talking as far as like the actual need, the data, and then not only and then the nutrition piece of it, like how it affects people's health. So, but it was timely then. Out of that conference came about some of our more prominent anti-hunger programs in the country, including SNAP, WIC for women, infant, and children, National School Lunch and Breakfast Program, which is crucial for all kids learning in schools, and even something that maybe we take for granted in our time is food nutrition labels. So all these things maybe weren't given much light before that conference, and now or back then you had so much advancement in those programs. One thing I found out recently, like around that time, food stamps, which is now called SNAP. Back then, people would have to pay for those, like out of pocket. So it would be kind of like a voucher that you paid for.
Wow,
and very few counties in the country supported it.
Oh, wow.
So, but yeah, again, just to kind of harken back on that, just the differences in that 50 years. So I think since then, and Kimmy can speak on this too, but our hunger has always been a bipartisan issue, thankfully. And just to kind of fast forward to now, we've talked about this a lot, actually, just within our advocacy team, and I think as a network of food banks, our work has gotten a really bright spotlight shown on it over the course of the pandemic. you're talking, I'm guessing your average American would have at least seen a photo of, those drive-through lines during the height of the pandemic, which, we're there now, right, as we speak at the beauty lot. So, but again, just I think the pandemic it's shown that light on inequality as far as food access, which I think similar to the first one, you had conditions that people they either just didn't know about or they just took it for granted. And you kind of, again, fast forward to now, that was kind of happening, before 2020, a lot of these sort of like inequalities, which, we'll get a little bit into, just we can talk about our, when we talk about our listening session. But again, between the science and the lived experience, that was a big piece of this White House conference was, leveraging people's lived experience around around those pillars, hunger, nutrition, health.
Well, it's amazing if, without the science and without the kind of, community experience, that still so much was accomplished 50 years ago. And I mean, it really shows what's possible for us now, given how important all of those initiatives have been, and as a stepping stone to what we can do now. I mean, I think it's, pretty exciting. But you mentioned about the listening sessions that we did, and lived experience, which, is basically, the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, our partners, Feeding America, all of our partner organizations, have been so focused on not just treating our clients with, dignity and respect, but also really trying to understand what people need in terms of, their food and other assistance. So if you could explain kind of how these listening sessions came about, what they were like, what we learned from those, because I know that this also played a role in how we prepared for the White House conference in terms of sharing those experiences as well.
Kimmy, if you want to give the background with the Feeding America piece, I think.
Sure. Yeah. So we were approached by Feeding America a number of months ago. I will say the White House Conference on Hunger, it's been something that people have talked about, advocates have talked about, members of Congress have talked about. Rep. Jim McGovern, he has been a really big advocate for the White House Conference for years, but it just hasn't happened. And so it's something that we've heard rumblings of for years and have just kind of like been waiting. And I honestly thought it was just like this high in the sky idea that probably wasn't going to happen anytime soon. So we heard about the conference back in the spring, and they announced that they would be doing the conference in September. So what Feeding America did was they set out to ensure that people—
Feeding America, just so in case there's folks who might not be familiar with it, it's an organization that that is kind of like an umbrella organization that food banks are members of, and it provides support and also ensures that every county in America has a food bank that can serve the folks there. Just in case folks aren't familiar, I'm sure you've seen Feeding America on TV and in different programs and stuff as well.
Great point. And Feeding America has an entire government relations team that is headquartered in Washington, D.C. So they are on the Hill all the time, hearing what's going on, lobbying on behalf of issues that relate to anti-hunger programs. So we hear a lot of what's going on from them. And they also help kind of set our shared priorities as a network. So what do food banks need? They kind of— things bubble up from us to Feeding America, and those things that bubble up from us usually bubble up from our network of 1,000 partners and bubble up to Feeding America, or Feeding America knows of something that's going on, like the White House Conference on Hunger, and they kind of like trickle things down to us. And that's what happened in this case. So we learned about the White House Conference on Hunger, and Feeding America knew that it was really important to center people with lived experience of hunger in the conference, rather than having advocates and industry experts at the table without people with experience at the table. So what they did is they offered grants to food banks to host listening sessions. And these listening sessions, they were very specific around what these sessions would entail. So we had a set number of participants that we could invite. We had a set of questions that we could ask. And their goal was to have 100 of these sessions across the network. In addition to those sessions, kind of like getting that qualitative side of things and understanding what people are going through and being able to have a conversation, they also had a goal to do 10,000 surveys. So we also participated in that effort. We worked with our amazing data team, such as Krista Mickelbank, Tessa, Neil, and they were able to send out a link to this survey from Feeding America to anyone who had visited our muni lot distribution, our weekly muni lot distribution over the past set number of months. They got this link via text. And so people could voluntarily click on the link and take a survey, kind of diving into what they were facing and what they believed needed to happen in their community to address hunger. And then in addition to that, there was this huge texting campaign that happened across the country where people could text with volunteers to collect information and understand priorities. So this was a huge undertaking. And like I mentioned, we found out about this in the spring. Conference was in September, and they wanted to put together an entire report. So we had like a month or so to put all of this together. But we knew as a food bank that we would, of course, host listening sessions. We decided to host 2 sessions, both at our Euclid Neighborhood Pantry, where we serve people. They're able to come on a weekly basis to get food for their families, their households. And it is set up like a food pantry, but we try to make it as inviting to feel more like a grocery store when people come in. So we hosted it during the hours when the pantry wasn't open. And anyone who participated got a $100 gift card for their time and expertise. And we had 7 people at each session. So on that note, I'll kick it off to Noelle if you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we learned during those sessions.
Yeah, thank you. I just remember, that Feeding America piece, when they came with the ask for the listening sessions, it was a short turnaround time. And I remember you were very much in the weeds with those details. So thank you for that summary. But yeah, to me, also, like, just to piggyback off that, their goal was 100 listening sessions, and throughout the country through their network of 200 food banks, of which we are one, and they crushed that goal. As far as I know, like, they were well over that 100 listening sessions, and that really speaks to the robustness of this network of food banks that we're a part of. I think, especially, not every food bank has an advocacy department. We're lucky to have 2 people in ours. Actually, we now have 3. We have an advocacy hunger fellow. But yeah, just, to see us be able to pivot that quickly and, kind of just provide that data was amazing. So, and speaking of our listening sessions at our Euclid Neighborhood Pantry, the clients that, or the participants, so 7 per session, we did 2 sessions, so 14 total. Many of them were actual clients of the Euclid Pantry. Big shout out to Jerry and his staff over there at the Euclid Pantry. He was very instrumental in recruiting these participants. Predominantly older. We found quite a few grandparents, and mostly women participated. So just one little detail there. And speaking of our advocacy hunger fellow, Zamara, big shout out to her. She was the one that facilitated both of those. So she was the one at the table, asking these, a lot of times not the most comfortable questions. The data that we got from that was, again, invaluable. We did share that with Feeding America on our sort of local level. 2 of the standout things that we found feedback wise was the fact that it's hard to keep SNAP benefits due to the amount of barriers in place. And, as I'll touch on it a little bit, but that's pretty much across the board nationally. So just kind of interesting that was like almost front and center with both of our listening sessions. And then the other one was that many, our clients are aware that many resources exist, but they're not well advertised and they're not always easy to access. So again, kind of going back to the barriers piece. So right before, if I remember right, either right before or right around the time of the White House conference a couple of weeks ago, Feeding America, they published their report, and the sort of four overlying themes that they found was, again, this is data from over 100 listening sessions across the country, the surveys that Kimmy mentioned, but what they found, which really, I think if it doesn't, it should inform all of our work as food banks, but prioritizing dignity, increasing access, expanding opportunity, and improving health. So again, as Kimmy mentioned, a lot of times, our priorities will, come from the ground up, but with Feeding America, for them to be able to kind of almost just take our data and, summarize it to that effect. I mean, I'm pretty confident our work here at the Greater Cleveland Food Bank does, we do work to address these issues, but just wanted to point that out. Now, lastly, I'll just add the fact that we were able to host a watch party here I said here, I meant at Waterloo, because we're in our new building now. That's how recent it was. But yeah, we had a great turnout, 50 plus staff, volunteers, donors, and even some, I was very pleasantly surprised to see quite a few of the listening session folks were there.
That's
so
great. Yeah.
We opened it to clients too. And yeah, we sat there and watched the keynotes, including President Biden, Mayor Eric Adams, New York City. That's a few that come to mind. So a lot of, one thing I was very surprised at was the turnout, because we only had about 2 or 3 days to get invites out and, get it all together. Not only just the turnout, but the engagement. You had people, they were applauding when the live stream people were applauding, you know what I mean? Everyone was really into it. And another thing that I'm, a big takeaway for me was the clients that were there who benefit from, programs like SNAP and WIC, they were very, very much engaged. They appreciated hearing from the policymakers who, determine how these programs, the different parameters, requirements, different things like that. I think so. It was good for them to just kind of see that firsthand, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was able to watch, most of the conference, after the fact. And I mean, I know it felt very engaged, watching it. And so I can only imagine how amazing it was to have that group of people there in person. All right, well, let's dive into what happened at the conference. So, it's just an overview. They had, 5 pillars in the conference. One really focused on food, kind of the healthcare sector, local food production, kind of physical activity, that other piece of kind of health, and then the entire kind of field of research, including lived experience and data and methodology and things like that. So a lot of different things. I know I was taking notes furiously. But for the food bank, that first pillar on the actual nutritious food is obviously the heart of what we do. So why don't you give a little bit of an overview about the content of that, and then how we think that what kind of ideas people were bringing to the table, in the meat of it all.
I can kick us off, and I'm actually going to take a little step back
Yeah,
to talk about what food insecurity is, because I think that leads into the conference and kind of how the pillars were built. So food insecurity means that you do not have access by all people at all times in your household for an active, healthy life. So in our service area, so the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, as a refresher for everyone on this call, we partner with organizations across Northeast Ohio. Those organizations are located in Cuyahoga County, Lake County, Geauga, Ashtabula, Ashland, and Richland. Our food insecurity rate within those 6 counties is 14.1%. That is higher than the national food insecurity rate, which usually hovers, it depends on the year, but about 10 to 12%. So what USDA does is they break out what food insecurity means and what food security means. There's a whole module that you have to take, this survey that asks a series of questions to find out if a household is food insecure, if a household is food secure, and then if children within that specific household are food secure. So we usually just talk about it as food insecurity for an individual, but it kind of depends who you're talking to and what you're talking about. So food security is broken into either you have high food security or you have marginal food security, which is really interesting because the way that it's defined by USDA, if you worry about where your next meal may come from, you're still defined as being food secure, as having enough food in your household. So that's just something to think about. And what we often see for marginal food security is that a lot of seniors fall into that category. So they have not skipped meals, but they don't know how they're paying for their groceries next week or the week after.
Now kind of in my, do I pay this bill or do I get food? That kind of, okay. Which
that's
is
exactly right.
A very challenging mentally and emotionally and physically to cope with.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, it also doesn't get to the fact that if you're dealing with that constant stress, it takes a toll on your mental health. It takes a toll on your stress, your anxiety, your depression. And there's a lot of data and studies that support that too. Now, when it comes to food insecurity, and I'll talk in a minute about why this matters, thinking about the first pillar, food insecurity is broken out into low food security or very low food security. So if you have low food insecurity, low food security, that means that you've reduced the quality of your diet. So you may not be eating all the foods that you need to eat to be healthy. You may not be, eating fruits and vegetables and proteins every day. You may just be getting by with rice and beans or pasta, or maybe some sort of starch because you're just trying to keep your stomach full, even though you're not getting all of those healthy foods that you need. Now, when we talk about very low food security, this rate is usually in the 4% range for across the entire country. And very low food security means that you are skipping meals. You are not eating. You have pretty significantly reduced your daily food intake. That is what people think of when you think about hunger. And that's what we often talk about. But then there's also this other component, which is food insecurity among children. And when you measure food security, there's also an entire separate module that you go to if there are children in the household to figure out if the kids are also not eating. So that number is usually about 6 to 8% of kids are food insecure. And when kids are not eating, that's when you know that things in a household are incredibly difficult because parents often give up their meals, their regular dietary intake before they would let their kids. So those are the situations that are really most concerning to us. So as a food bank, leading into the White House conference, kind of knowing all of this, we knew that it was really important to talk about nutrition, talk about health, talk about physical activity and, food security research. But for us, or maybe just for the advocacy team personally, what was most important is we have to address the fact that people are skipping meals before we talk about everything else. Because if you are hungry, if you've not eaten breakfast, lunch, or dinner for a day, everything else doesn't matter. That is the one thing. If your stomach is growling, if you know that your kid hasn't eaten in a day, you're not focused on anything else. So for us, that's why the lived experience with hunger was so important and why we did so much work around we need to make sure that food access is there before we worry about everything else. And Kate and I have talked about this, and she kind of summarized it well, of each step kind of builds on the other. Each pillar kind of builds. So we were like 100% most focused on the first pillar, which is increasing food access and affordability. I can kind of like kick off that pillar and say that for me and for I think a lot of people, what came up was the child tax credit. So the child tax credit was brought up repeatedly in the White House conference. For folks on this call, if you're not familiar with the child tax credit, what happened from July through December of 2021 was that the typical child tax credit was expanded and enhanced in a way that for those 6 months, anyone with kids under the age of 18 received $250 per kid per month in kind of like an advanced tax credit. So usually you get that credit when you file for your taxes in the spring the following year. Well, you could get it advanced this time instead. And you were getting more money than you typically would when you file your taxes in the spring. Now, if you had a little kid at home, you received $300 per month for that little kid. So that program was so effective. It actually lowered food insecurity among kids by 24%. In addition, 60% of lower income families used the benefit for groceries, even though it was not designed to be a food assistance program. And then more than 90% of families used the benefit for rent, groceries, clothing, or childcare, which is very expensive, as a lot of folks on this call know. So that is kind of like the number one thing that I noticed came up repeatedly in the White House conference and in increasing food access. So even though it's not a food assistance program, it's cash that families can use to purchase what they need and to stretch their budget however they need it. There was also a lot of talk about streamlining programs. So for anyone who has applied for public benefits or been through that process or works with it, when you apply for SNAP, you're applying for SNAP. When you apply for Medicaid, you're applying for Medicaid. When you apply for WIC, you're applying for WIC. And that means there's no streamlined process, and you have to go through that process and that process and that process. It's not effective. It is an administrative burden. There's so much red tape in maintaining and applying for any of these programs. So even though you might be eligible for, if you're eligible for WIC, you're eligible for SNAP, but you have to go through two separate processes to apply for those programs. So there's a lot of talk in the conference about how can we do this better? It is 2022. Why are we still operating like we are in all of these different silos? And honestly, it's a waste. I mean, when we talk about like ways to help families and ways for government and bureaucracy to be more efficient, the answer to that is not having 50 different programs that have 50 different processes and 50 different, benefit management systems. The answer is like, why aren't we streamlining this? So that was something that came up a lot. I'll say another big thing was around TFAP. And I know I've talked a lot about TFAP, but thinking about that program and how we received temporary funding during the pandemic, that temporary funding helped, it worked, it made sure that food banks had their shelves stocked, no matter what happened. And so what came out of the conference and what we've been pushing really hard for at the food bank is, let's make a permanent funding increase so that we're not worrying year after year if we're going to have enough money in TFAP to keep food on the shelves. And then also let's simplify requirements, which is always a win, because when we don't have to worry about all the red tape, then we can worry about what we do best, which is feeding people. And then finally, and kind of the piece that I think would have the most impact is around SNAP. So Noelle mentioned all the barriers that are in place when you try to apply for SNAP benefits. SNAP is also an incredibly modest benefit. So before the pandemic, the average SNAP benefit was less than $1.50 per person per meal. You can't feed a family on that. It's just not possible. And so what happened for a lot of older adults, the minimum benefit is $16 per month, and a lot of older adults were receiving $16 per month. They cannot stretch. You can buy about 3 apples. Yeah. So it's just not working. So this came up repeatedly during the conference. this came up in the White House listening sessions. People said, give us additional SNAP dollars, we'll be healthier. It's kind of common sense. If I can buy healthier food, that means I'm eating more, I'm eating healthier, I'm going to feel healthier, I'm going to be healthier. It's going to be easier for me to go to work every day, my kids to go to school, etc. So that is probably, like, in my opinion, child tax credit, increased SNAP, I hope will be two of the big takeaways from the conference. And also just make it simpler for people to maintain their SNAP benefits. So right now, if you're unemployed and you don't have kids at home, if you're job searching, you can job search for 3 months before you're kicked off the program. And it doesn't help you find a job. There's no dollars for employment training, no extra dollars for employment training, no resources for any type of like job connection. All it does is take away your food while you're trying to look for work, which doesn't make sense to us. So I'd love to see some of those types of requirements changed and kind of brought up to 2022 rather than, 50 years ago when the last conference happened. So I would say that's kind of like the big takeaways for me from the first pillar and what we're focused on as a food bank kind of in our advocacy work.
Well, and I know there were also in each of those buckets, there's also so many details and smaller, like, nuanced things that I thought was really interesting in the conference. And I know I started off by saying, scary, like, there was a lot of information, but you can watch all of the programs online, so you can get some of these details because there were so many experts, for all these different programs. And I mean, I think, with the application process, if all of these colleges can do a Conlin application and make it easier for, 16 to 17-year-olds to apply for college, we can do that. I know some, folks, I believe from Louisiana, were talking about using, different technologies to make the process easier. I know when during the height of the pandemic, being able to do phone calls instead of in-person things, made it so much easier. There are small lifts, it seems like, that are very achievable with just kind of some very simple updates. And one thing that I've been interested in with kind of the SNAP world is kind of, populations who get overlooked. I know you talked, about like unemployed people, and there are folks who there's chronic unemployment because of skill mismatches, or they live in an area where there aren't jobs and you can't move to Silicon Valley overnight. But also, like, college students, like you mentioned, seniors who, are really stuck between a rock and a hard place if they can't work, people with disabilities. It's obviously not in our service area, but, folks in Puerto Rico and American territories, there's barriers there with SNAP because they can't even use SNAP. It's a different program. So there's some really incredible work that, places, not just at the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, are doing for their own kind of, constituents that can still help us learn lessons about, again, all that innovation and sharing those details and that information. But I know when we were kind of preparing for this conversation, what struck me as being really interesting was how much our programs and how we're trying to innovate match with what clients in our listening session have been telling us. And then what all these folks from across the nation are also doing and trying to bring to the table. And it to me, like, that felt really great, because it's like it validates that what we're trying to do as an organization with increasing our capacity, trying to make things more efficient for our partners, and then trying to have wraparound services at the Euclid Pantry and at our redesigned South Waterloo facility. This is it feels right when you're hearing that your clients are pointing you in the right direction, we're responding in the right direction, and we have so much to learn, and that other people are on board with this across the whole country. That felt great to me to hear.
Yeah, I agree. And I definitely took that away from our listening session of how much people shared that they rely on their network of friends and family to get by, and how with our Euclid neighborhood pantry, our team has set it up in a way that different resources come and house their services on site at the Euclid Pantry at different times of the month. And they also just have a ton of information about different resources there. And it's easy to access, it's clear, it's upfront. And that was something we heard nonstop in the listening sessions was, I like that I don't have to look around, because I feel like all these resources exist and I need this resource with employment or health or housing so that I can pay for my groceries, but I don't even know where to look to find them. I don't know who to call. I don't know what to do. And so I think that's kind of like one of the directions that food banks are kind of moving into collectively, is acknowledging that food insecurity exists outside of a vacuum. It's not just food, it's all of these other issues. And the White House conference really tried to address that. They talked a lot about like the barriers to accessing food as it relates to like, well, I mean, if a grocery store is there, but there's no bus line to get there, it doesn't really make much of a difference for you if you don't have a car. Or the fact that, and this is very true in the greater Cleveland area, like there's not a lot of grocery stores left within city limits. And so you have a lot of people who want to get to the store and they physically cannot get to a store because one no longer exists in their neighborhood. So I think the White House conference is definitely moving into the direction of acknowledging that food insecurity exists like beyond food, or that the solutions are beyond food, that there's so much more to it. And that is what we heard over and over again in the listening sessions was, like, I need more employment training. I need more access to food. I need access to transit. Health, my medical bills are incredibly high. I need to get those lower before I move forward. I'm dealing with issues with housing. And I think the White House conference definitely got that and was trying to move that forward, which to me, I think is really reassuring, I guess I would say, that we're in the right direction.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, leveraging lived experience, the fact that, they made it a point, they made it a point to include that and just really have it inform, so they released their national strategy, 44 pages if anyone wants to leaf through it. But it's actually, a lot of it is very, to Kimmy's point, it's pointing, or it's a lot of it points to the right direction. And, just to call back to the lived experience piece, so valuable for them to not only acknowledge it, but for it to inform, the strategies and the policies that they're looking at moving forward. So again, just big credit to the White House, to the administration, and also to Feeding America for knowing that they have this network that they could leverage. We again, just as a food bank, 1,000 partners, and the clients that we serve, they each, and I think we all know this, but each one has a very unique story to tell. And for them to be able to get that voice and on this national stage, it's great momentum, and let's keep it going.
Was there anything that either surprised you, or that was something new? Because I think fortunately we do have a lot of great knowledge in our community, but just wondering if there was anything either from the listening session, the watch party, or from the conference itself that was either like a light bulb moment, a surprise, a new idea, something that really just kind of was like, ah.
I don't know. I feel like a broken record. Not surprised, but like most excited. I was really excited that the child tax credit came up over and over again. Because I did not know if that would come up during the White House Conference on Hunger. So yeah, I guess not so much of like a light bulb, but like you feel like you're like shaking Congress as a whole of like extend it. And so for the administration and members of Congress were the ones who like shaped this entire conference on hunger. It wasn't just the White House, it was the Congressional Hunger Caucus. So like knowing that this was a top priority and that they understand the importance of it, I think that was kind of like my light bulb moment. And hopefully it will be something that happens.
The we touched on this a little bit, not so much in our wheelhouse, but Medicaid, potentially covering medically tailored meals for people with pre-existing conditions. That could be a game changer in a lot of ways that we talked about. One of the things I picked up on that I thought was like, kind of stood out to me was as far as like empowering health more, having empowering access to healthy choices. I believe that was the third pillar, but looking at reducing sodium in our food supply and also like reducing sugar consumption. Again, not super related to our work, but just like knowing that that's kind of how thorough the strategy is. I just read earlier, I believe the American food system, or I don't know what you want to call it, not necessarily fast food, but like the retail food system has a marketing budget of like $14 billion annually. And, you think of the little funding we get here and there. I mean, it's all dwarfed by that, these, like Taco Bell, watch any sports game and Taco Bell is going to tell you what's available, what their latest product is, for instance. But, again, just like having that, being, the thoroughness, I think, is one thing that really surprised me and pleasantly, as far as like the strategy and the scope of the conference. So, yeah, pretty historic stuff.
Yeah. Well, I know this, again, this is also not completely related to what, we're focused on here, but, it was really interesting to hear like from farmers and from food producers, that, they are just as invested in having delicious, healthful food that they can get to, obviously, regular markets, but that they're deeply invested in also alleviating food insecurity and hunger as well. And I just think that's just exciting, and a piece that we really forget about, is that there are whether it's farmers or folks in meat production or dairy, or other like food manufacturers who want to be part of this, who are excited to be expanding the opportunities for people to have all this wonderful like American grown and produced food. So I just thought that was really neat. There was a younger woman who actually had been in a family farm and talking about the challenges of kind of that perspective, and going back to the issues that we've been seeing at the food bank with the supply chain is all these interconnections. And like you're just saying, Noelle, about kind of the scope of the White House conference is just so impressive, and teasing out all of these interlocking pieces of it, and that pretty much everyone wants to fix this problem. I mean, you said you said bipartisanship. It's even beyond, I think, bipartisanship when you hear about the medical profession, industry, nutritionists, folks who are in like the exercise parks, outdoor, world. You can tell I'm not in that world. I don't know. It was really impressive just how many voices were there. All right. Well, we're getting close to 1 o'clock. So just hoping that you can kind of share a little bit about what's next after the conference. And then, of course, the most important piece, which is what folks can do to help with food insecurity.
Yeah. Well, that actually ties really well into your discussion about farmers, because as we all know, farmers and growers, producers are the backbone of our ability to put food in our stomachs. We've seen what happens when supply chain breaks down, when farmers face challenges, and they face a long list of challenges. we've seen what happens. Grocery costs go up. That means that people aren't able to put food on the table. And we're really fortunate, we have this conference happened in 2022. The Farm Bill, which authorizes and funds all of the federal nutrition assistance programs outside of programs that focus on kids. So all of the programs like TFAP and SNAP, our senior box program, those are all funded by the Farm Bill. And that bill is up next year. So we are already setting the stage for the Farm Bill. There have been hearings on the Farm Bill by the House and Senate Agriculture Committees. They're working really hard, Feeding America, our food bank, the Ohio Association of Food Banks, and food banks everywhere, farmers, growers. Everyone is working really hard on the Farm Bill right now to ensure that our policy priorities are top of the list. So this conference happened at a really good time because we're talking about all of this now and we're preparing for next year. So there are a few things people can do. One thing that everyone who joins the session will get is a toolkit that we put together on the Farm Bill. It just talks about what the Farm Bill is, what kind of it funds, what it regulates, and why it matters to the food bank and to our food bank specifically, like which programs are funded by the Farm Bill, what types of rules do we have to follow? And it tries to just break it down so that if you've never heard of the Farm Bill before, the goal is you read this toolkit and you're like, I can understand this, because a lot of policies are just overly complicated and they don't need to be. So that is the goal of getting this toolkit. One thing after you take a little bit of a dive into it, I would encourage folks on this call, kind of take what we've talked about today, do a little bit of just skim over the toolkit. And I would suggest reaching out to the House Agriculture Committee. Right now, they have a really simple form built up where you can just click on it and enter in what your priorities are ahead of the Farm Bill. So it could be as simple as, I think that Congress should increase SNAP benefits because they're too modest. I think that Congress should increase TFAP funding so that food banks can keep their shelves stocked and keep food going out the door. It can be that simple. And all you would have to do is click on that form, fill it out really quick, and send it in. So they're tabulating all of those responses. And now is the time to do it versus next year, because they're still kind of setting their priorities as agricultural committees of what they want to do and what they want the Farm Bill to look like. Farm Bill is super bipartisan. The Farm Bill funds not only nutrition programs like the ones that we talked about, but it funds all of the farm insurance, commodity programs, anything related to farming is in that bill. And since we have federal nutrition programs and farming together, we get a really strong bipartisan bill every 5 years. So this is a really great opportunity for us to kind of elevate this. The Farm Bill is also where we could see changes with SNAP, where we could see benefits increase, where we could see our funding increase, where we could see some of the rules change so that it's not so hard to get benefits. So I think that's a really great way for everyone on this call, kind of like a first step, take a look at the toolkit. The other piece, we were laughing about this last week, right? The Farm Bill happens every 5 years, appropriations happen every year. So right now, Congress is going
I think it was one of the senators on the Appropriations Committee, was joking with the Farm Bill Committee people during the conference and being like, hey, we're here every year.
Mm-hmm. And they have a really important job, and that is to fund the government. And we all know that the government is not usually funded on time. And that is the case again this year. So they have not passed a federal budget yet. So we're kind of like operating in limbo at this point. It's called a continuing resolution is how the government is being funded right now. But looking ahead to the federal budget, what we are asking for right now, Congress, they have the ability to make sure that we have the funding that's needed to store and distribute all of the TFAP food that I talked about. If it weren't for funding to help us to store and distribute that food, and it's up to $100 million, the Farm Bill says food banks can get up to $100 million, all 200 have to split it to store and distribute food. Then if we didn't get that money, we'd have to pay for that completely out of pocket to store and distribute. And as you can imagine, the cost of diesel, the cost of getting food out the door is really expensive right now. So Congress is looking at funding that, appropriating the dollars that are needed. Historically, they usually give us like $70 to $80 million out of the 100 that we ask for. So if you want to get involved right now and ask for food banks to get the support that they need before the holidays, before everything, please reach out to your member of Congress. We have an action alert that's already set up, super easy to use. All you do is check it out. There's a template message you can add in your own language. And if you put in your address, it'll just send automatically to your member of Congress. So you don't even have to play the guessing game of, who's my member? So it's pretty simple, and you can do that now, and it would be really helpful now.
Yeah, with the governments, there's always a lot of different avenues to connect with people. And in the chat, there is the link to the Agriculture Committee form. There are a lot of boxes in there, but these comments really make a difference. And I hope with the again, SNAP is food stamps, TFAB is kind of that main program where the food bank is able to get free food that the federal government has purchased from American farmers and growers. So it's American food that then we can distribute for free to our partners. And then CSFP, which is a senior focused program to help them with specific food boxes for seniors who are low income. So 3 really important programs. It's alphabet soup, but we'll send out a toolkit to explain a little bit about what those are. So if you can take a moment to look at all of those, it'd be really great. And then we've also got the link there in the chat for our advocacy page. We've got lots of different things throughout the year to give people opportunities to use their voice. And of course, you've got an election coming up, so hope everyone is registered to vote. You check that out. Obviously our voice, whether it's the forms at the ballot box, are the ways to really make change. So a lot going on as always. So we really do appreciate all of your time coming here and joining us during your lunch here today. I will follow up, I'll share a recording as well as like the toolkit that we've mentioned. And also, folks have questions, please send them along. We are always happy to answer those. But just before, we wrap up here, just, Kimmy and Noel, if there's, something that you're just really excited about, for the future, you just kind of, ending on where we think we're going to be going. We're in a new building. We're having a renovated building opening up next year at South Waterloo. What's really giving you hope and kind of feeding that fire for you right now?
I'm excited to go beyond food. So I think that's, as I mentioned with the White House conference, that seems to be the direction we're going in. But that's the direction we've been going in for a while at the food bank. Not so that we're, the food bank will never be I'll never be a physician. I'm never going to be able to help someone, with their health issues. It's just not my thing. But, if we can do more to develop like a shared policy agenda, like what, as health and human service providers or as advocates in Northeast Ohio, what can we do to really move the needle on poverty, on food insecurity? How can we partner with our employment, healthcare, housing partners that are all going to be in our community resource center at South Waterloo? How can we all partner together to not only help people get connected to the resources that they need, but how can we use our voices to collectively advocate for policies that are going to move the needle? And I think that's what I'm most excited about, is kind of working with all of those organizations and getting to move that work forward.
For my part, you mentioned the new building, some of us, I don't know that some of us have been here for a week as far as the staff. That's how new it is. And, even 6 months ago, a year ago, it was hard to imagine this, and here we are. So for my part, I'm excited to see see on the ground what our increased capacity, what kind of impact it's really going to have. And then, of course, the South Waterloo reimagined as a community resource center. Super excited about that. As a longtime resident of the city of Cleveland, I do want, I don't want to see our poverty rates just kind of stagnate at the top of the, you know, national list. Like, can we make some kind of dent, some kind of like positive impact there? And I think it's a step in the right direction. So I'm really excited to see what that new work, what it's going to look like, and ultimately what the impact is going to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for taking your time today. Thank you for everyone who's joined us. We will be meeting with Nicole Cook and Amanda Papp on November 9th to talk about our senior and kids programs, our youngest neighbors and the young at heart. I hope to see you then. Again, we'll be in touch with all the material we talked about from today. But thank you for taking your time to learn more about this amazing opportunity with the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. And thanks, Kimmy and Noel, for joining us and for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us. All right, everyone, take care and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week and soon to be weekend.